Live from Chattanooga, Tennessee, it's Nuganomics with David Tulis.
Tennessee's aggressive panhandling charge has sprung into action here in Chattanooga with the accusations made against a longtime local man in the begging line of work. His name is Mendon John Price. The press has covered him extensively in the past couple of days. He's charged with aggressive panhandling, which includes intentionally touching the person being solicited, or obstructing the path, or following a person, or making a statement or gesture that would make a reasonable person feel fear of personal harm. That's the statute language. And this man, who's very well known in Chattanooga as in a wheelchair, as a man asking for money, asking for favors, panhandling, is going to be facing a criminal charge initially in the corporation court and city court, and is being defended in the press by the left side of Christianity, which is Mercy Junction Justice and Peace Center, and Brian Merritt. The people there are indignant that he's being accused. They say that his arrest criminalizes poverty. But on the other hand, there are those who, representing commercial interests, business interests, say that this man has been a continuing problem, and is rightly being pressed by the authorities for his overly friendly manner of approaching people asking for money. We want to find out how to think about this. What do you, my listener, need to do if you're approached by a panhandler or a beggar, or someone whom you maybe can't characterize that way in your mind, but who is asking you for money? They want you to give them something or do something for them, a total stranger. And to help us think through this question about Mendon Price and others whom you may have encountered, my listener, we want to ask Gene Johnson. Gene Johnson has been dealing with mendicants, beggars, and homeless people for decades. He's a deacon at New City Fellowship in Chattanooga, Presbyterian Fellowship. He oversees mercy and communications. Gene, how should my listener deal with people whom we could describe in shorthand as a panhandler? What is the listener supposed to do and think when confronted by someone or approached by someone, say in the street, asking for cash?
Well, that's a loaded question. You have many different ways of responding to that. I know all of us have pulled up to a street corner and someone is standing right next to our window with a sign in their hand, and we either kind of look the other way or just look straight ahead and hope the light changes real quick. We are in an awkward situation. Let's put it that way. Usually, just last week on Moore Road, my wife and I were driving by there, and it was 20 degrees, and a young lady was standing out there at the corner. What do you do? Now, one of the things that I do when I'm training people is I have a cardboard sign that I'll ask a volunteer to come up and hold, and that cardboard sign says, "Help end poverty, give me $10." Now, that's kind of a silly sign in a sense, because is $10 going to help end poverty? Well, obviously not. But sometimes we even in the back of our mind, we think if we're handing someone $1 or $5 or $2, we are actually doing anything to help them. And you and I all know money doesn't go that far, let alone if you're someone generally in a poverty, oftentimes a generational poverty situation, a situation in John's case downtown where you obviously you have one leg, you've lost a leg, the need is pretty obvious, and so it's really hard to know how to deal with it. And a lot of people choose to ignore it completely. We choose to ignore poverty because of where we choose to live. Most of us, thankfully, live in neighborhoods where we don't have to deal with it every day. Some of us probably live in neighborhoods that have guards at the gates that don't let people in. So when you're approached downtown and various things like that, you're put in a real bind, because sometimes we even lie. Sometimes we say, I don't have any money, or we make excuses. Now, I'm sure there are panhandlers now that have smartphones that have Square cards on their phones, so that would probably even take a credit card. That sounds kind of cynical, but I guarantee you, the creativity is there. Over the years, I've had a lot of different experiences, everything from working on Skid Row in Chicago in the 1970s, where, the alcoholism and the drug use and things like that, and the poverty was so extreme, that you don't know what to do, to situations where I work at a church that's in a middle class neighborhood with poverty surrounding us, and I deal with people literally sometimes every day who come to our office in need. Now, is that panhandling? If someone comes to a church and says, I need food, is that panhandling? Well, yes, in a sense it is, because most of us have never been in a situation where we've had to go and ask a total stranger for money. So it's a very difficult problem, because there are a lot of needy people. Now, I think God calls Christians to embrace those people. The script, if you read the Bible at all, or you see that God has a heart for the poor. Jesus, in his first things he said in his public ministry, he said, I came to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind. He came for needy people. Jesus even said things to the effect of that, I did not come to be served, but to serve. Jesus saw the crowds, and he saw that they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Well, when you're looking at a panhandler or the homeless population, which is pretty large in Chattanooga, you're seeing people who are harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. So I can understand the folks that are upset about the attitude towards someone like John. Now, John's been around for years. I think all of us have relatives in our family. Most of us have relatives in our family who are always hitting up other family members for money. And do we even in those situations, do we tolerate and constantly give them money, or do we cut them off? So limits to helping is something that's needed, but how you do it and stuff is, again, a very difficult situation.
Well, I think the question that is before my listener is, does helping that homeless man with a $5 bill or $10 bill, does it really help him, or does it simply further his problem? Does it simply subsidize his incapacity, or his unwillingness to work, or his unwillingness to think as the marketplace requires of service to others?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, see, that's a good question, because for most of us, $5 is nothing in the big picture. Now, obviously, if you've got $6 in your pocket, $5 is a lot of money. But for most of us, my wife and I went to a movie theater a couple weeks ago, and we went to a matinee and got senior discounts, and still for two of us, it was $12 just to watch a movie. Now, I remember when movies used to be $1, but so money, that kind of, it's a relative thing. So on the one hand, giving somebody money, even if they're going to buy a drink, and sometimes it's even refreshing if someone says, I'm an alcoholic, I need a drink. And you say, well, at least they're being honest with me. Again, anybody working in this kind of thing at all can get, and I can give you story after story after story of people who have lied and told stories and things like that. And so then the question comes, well, if they're lying to me, do they deserve my help? Well, the reality of it is, do any of us deserve help? Now, I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible. And the Bible says that the heart of man is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So from my theological perspective, should I believe anything anybody tells me? That's a pretty cynical way of looking at it, but why should I believe the story of the stranger? Now, again, over the years, I can get, one night I was in a meeting here at the church, and like I said, we're in the Glenwood neighborhood, and our music director called me from across the street and said, there's an Amish man here that needs help. This is 7:30 at night. It's dark. And I said to myself, I've heard every story now. Well, it was an Amish man who needed help. And he was an Amish man with a walker, the black beard, the black hat, the white shirt, the black suspenders. And he was taking a bus to someplace in Middle Tennessee, and they thought he had a heart attack, and they took him to the hospital, and that wasn't the situation, and they gave him a voucher for a shelter, and he started walking, and he got to the shelter, and it had steps he couldn't climb, and he went from one place to another, and somebody sent him to us. Well, we were able to put him up for the night. We were able to, next morning, get him a bus ticket to this little place in Middle Tennessee. And it was kind of a blessing. His name was Daniel. He even said a prayer for us when we dropped him at the bus station. So you never know. You never know what you're gonna encounter. And so you don't want to be cynical and not believing the story. But you also need to be wise in how you're doing it.
Well, Brandy,
one thing I've suggested to people is if you have money that you want to give to someone who asks you in need, that set it aside, whether put it in your left pocket or something like that. And then if you are approached, you can, and if you're a Christian, I encourage Christians to pray in advance saying, Lord, this money's here. If you put someone in my path today, so that way you're not caught off guard. You're not, and then you can also say, that's all I have to help with. And you're being legitimate. So in other words, you're kind of like budgeting money to give to panhandlers. I think that would really be appropriate if you work in a situation where you're constantly getting panhandlers. So that helps you not feel so guilty when you say no, or guilty if you ignore someone, because the poor are ignored in our society.
This is David Tulis. We're talking with Gene Johnson, who's a deacon.
The faceless, the homeless, the people on the street, generally speaking, are ignored by society.
Well, let me ask you, Gene Johnson. Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question about the distinction between the worthy poor and the unworthy poor. When you meet a panhandler, there's no way. The question immediately is, does he deserve my help? Is he worthy of my gift or not? How does that question come into play in these very brief encounters? Can it come into play at all? What is there something my listener can do to make it possible to make that distinction?
Well, first of all, you can talk to someone. You can stop. You can ask them questions. Often, you got to remember that if someone is a total stranger approaching you on the street and is able to start telling you their life story and very personal information, just think about if you're say at the shopping mall and your battery is dead and you have jumper cables in your car, but it's still very difficult for you to approach a total stranger and even ask them to help jump your car, let alone go into your life story. So you can pretty much assume if someone does that to you, they've done it before, and it's a routine for them. It's very hard to ask someone else for help. But a good example was a few years ago, we were doing, Paul Green, who heads up Hope for the Inner City here in Chattanooga, we were doing some training in Miami, Florida. And we were picked up at the airport, and we were training people in mercy. And the fellow that picked us up, as we're leaving the airport, there's a van with its hood up right there at the light. Broken down car. And the man asked us for money. Now, the poor guy that was here, he's taking two, quote, mercy experts. So he gave the guy $20. And then he turned to us and he said, "Well, did I do the right thing?" And we kind of said, "Well, that's fine. I wouldn't have done it, but that's fine." Well, 2 weeks after that, almost to the day, I got a phone call from the fella in Miami who was picking someone else up at the airport. And here was a car broken down in that same spot. But it was a different car, but it was the same guy. Well, this time, the friend got angry, and he called the police on the guy. Now, okay, what should we do in those situations? Now, first of all, you can say no politely. You can say no, and still show the person dignity. You can try to direct them someplace else. If someone needs a ride somewhere, I would not recommend that a woman pick up a stranger and take them somewhere. But if there's a couple of you to do that, if you can know the resources that are available in Chattanooga. For instance, if you're downtown and someone asks for food, well, the community kitchen, I believe it's 3 times a day they serve food, no questions asked.
So, pardon my listener then you're saying suggesting Gene Johnson, deacon at New City Fellowship, that the listener have some knowledge of where to direct someone or a place or an address to which the listener can direct a person asking for money. Simply having the address in mind.
Yeah, and generally speaking, if you're in a common area downtown, most of the folks that you're talking to will already know those resources. But again, those resources oftentimes, for instance, there's a shelter that opens up on cold nights in Chattanooga, and they'll advertise it on the news and things like that people can go to that shelter if it's below a certain temperature. But they have to leave by 6 a.m. Well, if you look at the temperatures, when is the coldest part of the night? It's generally 6
7
in the
or 8.
morning.
Right.
So, I mean, there is a shelter available, but you got to be out by 6 a.m.
Go ahead.
So the systems in town are there, but oftentimes they're not convenient. Now, there's a couple principles to follow. There's one is if someone really needs help, they will try to work within the system. Okay. Another thing to remember is, don't you work harder at solving someone's problem than they're willing to do. Don't you work harder at solving someone's problem than they're willing to do.
We'll give an example of that.
Especially middle-class folks, we're fixers. So we're gonna fix these problems. In a fellow like John's case, who I'm not sure, I probably encountered him 15, 20 years ago. If I think I'm going to fix his situation in a few minutes or something like that, obviously I'm not. Now, again, oftentimes people in those situations, they get some sort of check. They do have housing. They do have some means of getting support. But in their cases, and I think John's a good example, they actually look at what they're doing as a job. Okay, this is their means of livelihood.
Yeah, this is David Tulis. We're talking with Gene Johnson, who's a deacon at New City Fellowship. And we're talking about Menden John Price, who's being accused in city court of aggressive panhandling. That's a state statute that prohibits that. Well, Gene, we have just another minute. So so again, the distinction that the listener wants to ask about is, how do I know distinguish between the worthy poor and the unworthy poor? Is there some way of doing that in a short time frame of a street encounter with an ostensibly needy person? Are there some principles of action or observation that would be helpful?
Yeah, usually asking common sense questions. Usually if someone's telling you this is an emergency or things like that, obviously I deal with people, for instance, whose light bill is getting cut off this afternoon. Well, this just happened? No, there's just, part of it too is this my responsibility? Now, again, we all have responsibilities to one another, but like I said, doing what you can at that time. Again, like I said, if you, but also as a Christian, I believe the church has responsibilities, and in John's case, for instance, where he attends a church, that part of the responsibility of that church is to take him in to help him, oftentimes provide work for him. I have a good friend that here at our church, who our initial contact was years ago. He needed food, but he's one of the best workers I've seen. So he's able to, because of his connection with the church, he does yard work for a number of people in the church. If someone needs help with something, we can recommend him. Now, again,
John, this is David Tulis. This is David Tulis. We thank you very much for joining us. We're talking with Gene Johnson of New City Fellowship about the aggressive panhandler case.
Let those boys have a bud.